Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Kennedy Report. This is a big day. I figured I'd wait till all the other Catholic YouTubers were done their presentations, which were wonderful. It was great to watch Eric Sammons and Taylor Marshall and Matt Fradd this morning, and it's just a joyous day. I haven't felt this sort of energy for the pro-life, pro-Christian, pro-Catholic cause since probably the election of Donald Trump, which ended in a little bit of a sad situation for supporters. We're going to talk about that today and why it has to do with what's happened today in the Supreme Court. I'm going to take a unique view. I believe that Our Lady of Fatima and specifically the consecration of Russia had a big part to do with the ending of Roe versus Wade in America. I know it's not the ending of abortion per se, but I know that it's a huge, massive blow to the abortions question. In the chat here, I was having problems with my video quality the other day. There was an issue. If there are any issues, please let me know in the chat. There's not much I can do about it, but at least I can know. I don't know, something wrong with our connection. I don't know. The other day I was doing a video on Freemasons, and sometimes the gremlins get into the technology when that's the case. Okay, well, I'm going to tell you a quick story. So on June 12th, that was about 2 weeks ago, or 12 days ago, there were rumors that it was going to end on June 13th. And if you are a Fatima person like I am, if you I worked for a Fatima organization, thank you, Nicholas, for saying the video is fine. The dates are big deals. May 13th, June 13th, all the way through to October 13th. Yes, there's a little difference because the seer children were sequestered. I get that. But the 13th of the month between May and October are a big deal. Well, June 13th is actually the day when Our Lady gave Sister Lucy the instructions in 1929. And I was thinking to myself, it's June 12th. This thing might drop tomorrow. Me as like a Fatima guy, this is a really big deal. So I wrote down this thing that we're actually going to go over here in a sec. I wrote down all this stuff. But I was really nervous about what was happening. I mean, we were all nervous, weren't we? We were all praying and we're like, what's going to happen? Is ACB going to fold? Is Kavanaugh going to be a wet blanket or whatever? I can't believe Justice Roberts voted in the right direction. That was crazy. But there was a lot of things we're thinking this might not go through. I mean, we've been let down before. We've been let down many times over the last 2 years, especially. I mean, it's been a terrible, up and down of hope and despair for pro-lifers, Christians, conservatives in general. Here in Canada, I've been living through one of the worst lockdowns in the world. It's still not gone all the way. I mean, there's still some restrictions that unvaccinated people have, and it's really a pain in the rear end. The trucker protest was like an emotional high, and then Justin Trudeau comes down, acts like a petty dictator, and it's been one of those eras. So I wrote this thing very hesitantly, and then I thought to myself, what if it doesn't happen tomorrow? I'll just tell you a quick story. It was Sunday evening. My wife is like 11 months pregnant, so she was laying in bed. It was 7:30 at night or so. I was out front writing this on my laptop, sitting on the front step. I live in a tiny little village. My kids are just riding the bike in front. My oldest son comes to me, and he says, Dad, can I pray the rosary while walking around our property with roses? And I said, okay, sure, of course. No, son, you can't do that. Of course I said yes. And then his brothers and sisters started jumping in, and they all went and got roses from the garden in this little basket, and we're just putting all these petals around. And I'm sitting there writing this thing. My children have no idea what I'm doing. They don't even know what's going on. I mean, my oldest is 6 years old, and they're homeschooled. They have no idea what's happening, blissfully, thankfully, what's happening in the world right now. And I'm writing this thing, and if you've ever written things in support of Mary or the Church, Christ, you've probably experienced, diabolical interference attacks. There was a very chaotic feeling I had, and things where I was having a feeling that there was sort of an attack going on. And I'm not an overly spiritualist kind of guy, but I'm just saying I could tell in that moment that was happening, which is not uncommon when you write for LifeSite and places like that, as I do, because we write for the truth, and the devil hates the truth. In any case, this was particularly annoying, though. So my son comes up to me and he says, Dad, can we go for a rosary walk? I said, okay. I've never done this. I've never asked him to do this. So he starts leading, and he's leading. He's 6 years old. He has his rosary. I have videos of it. And he's leading us around the village, walking, and his little brothers and sister are just throwing little petals on the ground and walking with roses. They've never been to a rosary procession before like that. He leads us to the cemetery. In the cemetery, there is a large crucifix. And I have never been to the cemetery before. We just recently moved here. a large crucifix. And the crucifix is not a grave. I thought it was a grave. It's actually a memorial that was put in somebody's honor for all of the millions of unborn children that have died of abortion. My son has no idea what this is, but he asks if he can go place his rose on the tomb that or on the memorial that we just knelt in front of to finish the rosary. He has no idea what's happening. And then my other children take their rose petals and they start putting them around this memorial. They have no idea. My oldest son can read a little bit, but he can't read the long words in this plaque. I mean, he's just finished grade 1. I was immediately consoled in that moment, and I realized to myself, this is Our Lady. This is the Immaculate Heart. This is clearly Marian. This is what's happening with this. And I thought to myself, when it didn't happen on June 13th, I said, there's going to be a day that's going to be even stronger. And it's going to be clear that this has to do with Our Lady of Fatima. It has to do with consecration. And I can't imagine a stronger day than today, which we'll get to. So I want to share my screen here with you. I'm going to look at here this Word document. So this is background on Fatima, and I want to make sure that we all are on the same page so you can see where my line of thinking is. So May 13th, we know this, 13th, we have the second. This is where the Devotion Act was established, and this is also where we have the Fatima prayer for the Rosary. On July 13th, this in 1917, this is where we're told about the consecration of the Immaculate Heart, and where we're told about the errors of Russia. Now, noted, communism is not the error of Russia. I've thought that before, but communism existed before this, and it existed since the 1800s. Long had it been known that communism was not uniquely from Russia. We'll get to that in a sec. Sorry, I should say communism is an error as part of Russian Soviet communism, of course, but it's not unique to Russia. What's unique to Russia? I shall come into the world to ask to be consecrated to my Immaculate Heart, and I shall ask that on the first Saturday of every month, communions of reparation be made for the sins of the world. If my wishes are fulfilled, Russia will be converted in their peace. If not, then Russia will spread her errors throughout the world, bringing new wars and persecution to the church. Hopefully that happened as it happened. Someone says here in the chats, I should say, in my opinion. Sure. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Jack Sparrow. That's a wonderful name. Yes, in my opinion. And it says, if not, Russia will spread her errors. Then the good will be martyred. The Holy Father will have much to suffer. Certain nations will be annihilated. My emphasis. But in the end, Immaculate Heart will find Russia to me, and she will be converted. And the world will enjoy a period of peace. So lots in here. So if this doesn't take place, if there's no consecration, then Russia will spread her errors. We'll talk about the unique error in a second. And there'll be new wars and persecution of the church. That happened exactly. Look at the 1920s in Mexico. When the World War, what happened in the communist countries that were taken over, Catholic that were taken over. I mean, all of this clearly came true. And it said whole nations, certain nations annihilated. That's always been one that's been difficult to understand because we've never seen a whole nation annihilated. It's one bomb, the nation's gone. We haven't seen that. And that's actually very unlikely. But we have seen, even with nuclear weapons, still very unlikely. We have seen, though, borders redrawn. We have seen nations disappear off the map because of, rearrangements geopolitically of events. But we have seen entire nations of people be annihilated through abortion. You see, the word nation literally just means to be born, from the word birth. How many hundreds of millions of people have been aborted? I mean, how many nations is that worth? This opinion, but I'm just saying that's actually something to consider. This will tie in with the unique error of Russia in a sec. But Our Lady says all of this is going to happen, but in the end, so but in the end, so this will happen, but in the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me, and she will be converted. So clearly, this is all coming true. All of this happened. Major nations have been rewritten history. The Holy Father has had much to suffer. There was an assassination attempt on him. The popes were basically sequestered. Might have ended just after this period, I think. Popes have suffered in many other ways. Look what happened to 12th. I mean, he suffered so much, his reputation. He was a hero in the Second World War, but he suffered under. And she said, "But in the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph, consecrate Russia to me." It's totally reasonable to look at this and say, you know what? All of this happened, which means, yeah, that came true. And if that does happen, now we'll see the triumph or the triumph of the Immaculate Heart, and the Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me. Those things go together, as it's said in the message. Okay, so what is the true error of Russia? Well, again, communism is spread by Russia, but it's not unique to Russia. And it didn't start in Russia. It was actually given to Russia through a lot of French intellectuals to be. Um, Legal abortion, in my opinion, is the uniquely, truly error of Russia. Okay, that was the first nation, if I'm not mistaken, to legally make abortion a thing, and then that did spread throughout the world with the communism that was the result of the Soviet Union. I think abortion is the clearly unique error of Russia. Um, Russia is not responsible for the spread de facto of a heresy. Russia is not responsible for the initiation, or it's not the progenitor of a political heresy, as it exists in other places. But abortion as a legalized practice did begin there, and then it spread throughout the world. And I don't think that can be underestimated. And I said, if there ever was a way to interpret whole nations being annihilated, I think that abortion is a must. So fast forward, June 30th, Our Lady gives specific instructions to Sister Lucy at 2 Um, and there was another date in there that I did not write down because my intention here is not to prove the consecration that Pope Francis did is valid. I've done that in another video. You can check that out on my channel. Although in 1931, Christ did appear to Sister Lucy in Rianjo, Spain, and asked that she beg the conversion of other countries besides Russia. So that's important. 1973, Roe versus Wade. Okay, the most pernicious error of Russia is made legal in America, the world's most powerful nation. January 20th, 2017. Someone else says that the main error of Russia was likely evolution. That is a major error of Russia. I mean, evolution and abortion go hand in hand. I agree with you on that. I'm not saying that Russia abortion is the only error. I just think it's the one that's unique to Russia, legal abortion that wasn't anywhere else. Although Russia did greatly spread evolutionary theory around the world, but it didn't start in Russia. Legalized abortion wasn't the first place to have evolutionary theory taught. It was the first place to have legalized medical elective abortion. That's my point. But I agree with you that evolution is a massive error that has come out of Soviet communism. And, Hugh Owen has talked about that, and he's a genius on this stuff, and for sure. Okay. Um, February 20th, President, and by the way, his birthday is June 14th. I don't know why I wrote that. I think it's because I'm writing it. May 13th, 2017, 100 years to the day. Okay. It was a big deal. This is the day, it was the date of the first revealed email from the top from hell, beginning of the unraveling of the corrupt history of Biden, who represents the pro-abort, apostate Catholic leaders par excellence. Very significant. May 13th, 2017. This date, everyone thought something was going to happen. What's going to happen May 13th, 2017? Nothing really happened. It was a 100-year of Fatima. It was a big deal, but it really happened. We find during the election, and we'll get to why there's a Fatima aspect of the Trump presidency as we go. And but remember May 13th, 2017. So May and June 2017, the White House is exercised by a Catholic priest, and there's an image of Trump with the Fatima statue. This before. Gilder Marshall has verified this. I've verified this. I've looked pretty hard. I believe it's accurate that this is real. And the story basically goes. I'm going to put this over here like this. The story goes essentially, Melania Trump had the White House exercised. So, in any case, it's a little smaller so we can see. Donald Trump is installed as president, or is inaugurated, I should say. He has the White House exercised. He promises he's going to put pro-life judges on the court. And we have to think for a second here. And he asked to keep the statue of Fatima. So this statue was in the White House. Our Lady of Fatima was in the White House. That's kind of a big deal. And I remember in the lead up to the election of Donald Trump, we were all talking about this. And then with the big letdown of what happened, it was kind of like, wow, we really thought that there was something Marian behind this thing. It's very strange. But maybe there was more to it. And we have to think, guys, the demonic resistance to Trump needs to be taken into account. It's not enough to say that he was just a bad guy, a bad Christian, whatever. But the resistance to Trump was insane. It was like preternaturally insane. Syndromes of derangement were developed. To be honest, I think the only way to describe that resistance was spiritual. Um, Now, but again, Donald Trump failed in a lot of ways. He failed on the medication that everyone's been coerced into considering. He failed on lockdowns. He failed on a lot of stuff. He failed in a lot of places. He had a terrible person. I mean, he is not Saint Donald Trump, not even close. But there was something about him that left, like, if you talk to a leftist about supporting Donald Trump, it was the end of the world. They could not believe how, I mean, if he really was just one of them and he's just kind of a psyop and stuff, how did we get to this point where you'd bring up Donald Trump amongst people, total strangers, and they'd have like seizures? Like, it was insane. I couldn't believe it. I've never seen anything like this. And I have a theory for this, okay? My theory is, well, listen, leftism is basically, leftism is basically a demonic thing, right? It stands for everything against everything good. I mean, it's pro destruction of the family, it's pro destruction of the church, it's pro destruction of society, it's pro destruction of children, it's pro destruction of innocence of children. Like, it is satanic. Like, everything that leftism stands for today, especially. If you give yourself over ideas, you inculcate yourself with the reprobate ideas of this weird, strange, diabolical political cult that has developed, you get the strangest results, and it's clearly natural. And when people are influenced by demons, they react really insane to things that anger the demons. This is what exorcists will tell you. This does not mean Donald Trump was holy. This does not mean Donald Trump was a good guy. It doesn't even mean that he was a decent president. But there was something about him that drove them insane. And I think almost, it's like the of the leftists and their reaction to Trump is almost more telling of how important he was than the praise of him by those on the right. That's my opinion. Back to this thing here. Trump did three things that were super important, and I believe this is why the demons were so mad. He put in Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Barrett. Even though Trump was to lose the election under very controversial circumstances, Providence took RBG and gave us ACB, stacking the court under unlikely circumstances. But then even people thought, oh, ACB, she's not going to follow through. Everyone thought, oh, she's just one of them. And Kavanaugh, he's kind of squishy. He said this and there, whatever thing. Today we come out at 6-3 vote. It wasn't even just the ones Trump put on. It was also Roberts. I couldn't believe it. Was Roberts put on by Trump? I don't think he was. Now, December 1st, 2021. So Trump loses the election. December 21st, 2021. December 1st, 2021. This is the beginning of the Dobbs saga. This is the case that was ruled today. This is the beginning of the month devoted to the Immaculate Heart. Remember, in the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. And it will coincide with the consecration of Russia by the Pope. This is also the starting of Advent. I think this is symbolic. And this is the lead up to the Nativity as well. Childbirth, the birth of our Lord, incarnation. I mean, these are obviously very symbolic things from a life perspective, I think. Fast forward. February 24th, 2022. Putin invades Ukraine, pressuring UC. And I'm not talking about the goodness or badness of the Ukrainian conflict. I'm of history, Russia started a military operation. I understand people will debate who's pro. I'm not saying anything about that. I'm just saying this is what happened. Putin invades Ukraine, pressuring Ukrainian Catholic France through the consecration, quote unquote, as Our Lady requested. That's a big deal. You're not supposed to say that because John Paul II already did it, right? but they said it. Pope Francis didn't say, I will send out a letter asking everyone to pray for the renewal of the consecration of John Paul II, who already told this, blah, 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 blah. He said, sure, I'll do it. I was astonished. Everyone was astonished. We couldn't believe it. Remember the lead up to that. Now, March 25th, Pope Francis does the consecration validly according to none other than Bishop Schneider. I think he's pretty good. This is on the Feast of the Annunciation. Remember the importance for that. May 2nd, 2022, Roe versus Wade leaks. The decision leaks, the Dobbs decision, day after Feast of St. Joseph the Worker. That's a month dedicated to beating communism, speaking of areas of Russia. This is also the month of Mary. Remember, so the case began in its discussion, the beginning of the month dedicated to the Immaculate Heart. And then the case is leaked, the decision's leaked at the beginning of the month to Mary. Then on June 24th, Feast of the Sacred Heart and Nativity of John the Baptist. This is when things go down today. Now, before I get to why that's so significant in a second here, when you're done watching this, click the link in my description. Help my friend Anthony in her quest to become a nun. One thing we have learned from the Fatima saga is that we need good nuns like Sister Lucy. And this young lady wants to be a Passionist nun, and I've looked up their order. They seem awesome. Please support her. $5, $10. Help a nun. You don't call it college, but help a nun go to nun school. The costs for the convent and those sorts of things. Those things are important. Okay, help her. Okay. Yes, and Mark Tazak says March 25th is also the anniversary of the death of Marcel Lefebvre. I think that's pretty great too. Thanks for bringing that up, Mark. Okay. Now, there's what I want to read here that I put out on LifeSite today that hammers home the real significance. Oh, by the way, here is the supporter in religious. Okay, her name is Kristen Abate. The link is in my description. Please do that. Okay. So I wrote this and I said why consecration to the Immaculate Heart may have helped bring an end to Roe v. Wade. So this ties this whole thing together. I think that this will make it. I'm just going to read this and we'll go through it together. So there are no coincidences, and miracles come when least expected. In fact, I would say that miracles are by definition unexpected, as they are like heavenly moments of God's power sneaking in behind the enemy lines of the natural to bring blissful supernatural interruptions. Last year, when it was announced that Roe v. Wade would be considered for the chopping block, I, like many, did not think much would come of it. Sure, the court was not pro-life. Sorry, the court was pro-life on paper. That's a typo. But the legal ins and outs of constitutional law are complicated. In addition, who knew how Trump's judges would act under pressure? Well, then something miraculous happened, which is to say something completely unexpected happened. Pope Francis decided to consecrate Russia and Ukraine to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Now, I should caution that my arguing that what has happened may in fact be a result of the Pope's actions in March. I'm not making a claim that we are in the triumph of the Immaculate Heart or that an age of peace has descended. Instead, I'm just looking at the goings-on through the lens of the Catholic religion, prophecy, and liturgical calendar. For a moment, let's consider what it might look like if heaven were to give us a sign that Pope Francis's consecration was pleasing to God. We could imagine a variety of scenarios, I'm sure. In my opinion, the overturning of the most significant abortion law in the history, in the most powerful nation on earth, might be a contender for a wink from heaven. Of course, it could be that it has nothing to do with the Pope's actions in March, but there's more to the story. Today is the Feast of the Sacred Heart, and it is also the traditional feast of the birth of St. John the Baptist. Yes, the feast was moved to tomorrow in the old calendar due to the supremacy of Christ's feast. However, it is the vigil of St. John's feast and is celebrated as his birthday in Quebec and historically Catholic countries. Point being, today, in a cultural sense, is as much the feast of St. John the Baptist as it ever was. And it is also the actual feast of the Sacred Heart. So, to just put that into perspective here, the 24th is always the feast of St. John the Baptist. In the future, we'll look back, and Roe versus Wade was done on the 24th, and this we'll always be reminded of this on the feast of St. John the Baptist. You know, the feast is moved, but the date is still his day historically because that's his nativity. The date of his nativity has not changed. There was a world of significance to unpack in this providential meeting of the Sacred Heart and John the Baptist. Let us consider the first meeting between Christ and John. Immediately after the Annunciation, which is March 25th, the day Pope Francis did the consecration, Mary and her Immaculate Heart visited Saint Elizabeth. And it is said that upon her arrival, the infant leapt in her womb. Thus, we understand that John, who was around the age of 6 months gestation, leaped at the arrival of his Savior, who was in the very early stages of life. We might say that the first thing between John the Baptist and Christ was a moment when the flooding of the Sacred Heart caused John's to jump for joy. Pro-life significance in this encounter is easy to see, given that a sacred child and a saint-to-be were able to connect in a way that goes beyond mere biology. There is a spiritual element to the encounter, which tells us that God has endowed the unborn with a unique human soul, thus the full dignity of a fully grown human person. Now, if heaven were to make its presence known in the world, especially in a moment like this, I think we can reasonably make a few connections. 3 months after Pope Francis consecrated Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, there comes a providential day when the Sacred Heart and the heart of John collide. And on that same day, a judicial miracle takes place wherein the beating hearts of innocent children are given their rights. In this month that we are told is dedicated to pride, the power of Satan is overcome by the precious blood beating in the Sacred Heart that was made incarnate by our Lord, condescending himself into the flesh in an infinitely important act of humility. In addition, it is often forgotten that John the Baptist was beheaded because of his defense of marriage. It was only when he called out the king's perverse and adulterous activities that he was put to death. How fitting that heaven's defender of marriage would intervene in the month where marriage is denigrated the most. The modern world has descended into a most ghastly grip of neo-pagan ritualism, and the destruction and the children that result therefrom act as sacramentals in a perverse society. However, the devil may have his hour, but Christ will have his day, and he will not have his day without his mother, just like he would not give us his first incarnating in the womb nourished by the blood that pumped from the Immaculate Heart. The battle for life is not over, but the forces that run our governments are reeling in anguish as their topsy-turvy worldview has taken a mortal blow. Hope sacred over Roe, and I believe have the most unlikely of think. So, to sum things up here, I believe the consecration that Pope Francis did was valid, and I believe that the miraculous ending of Roe versus Wade, which is just the beginning. This is just the beginning. Yes, the abortion debate will go to some states. Well, Missouri's already made it completely legal. You have to understand something as well. If there is going to be a triumph of the Immaculate Heart that we're going to see and a reign of peace and so on and so forth, wouldn't it be amazing if there was a Catholic majority decision on the highest court in the most powerful nation on earth? Would it be amazing if a traditionalist judge like Justice Clarence Thomas would put out a decision where he would actually argue that the ending of Roe versus Wade means we have to look at the other decisions that had legalized contraception, same-sex unions, and so forth? This is just the beginning. The reason why Roe had to fall first is because it's just like we read in the Old Testament. You have to stop the child sacrifice. It's just like with the Aztecs and Our Lady of Guadalupe. You have to stop the child sacrifice. You have to stop the pagan rituals. Once you do that, and you're done with the anti-sacraments, you have room for the other ones. This is only going to embolden pro-lifers. It's only going to embolden Catholics. It's only going to embolden Christians. And it's just the beginning. Even the states where you think it's going to be a slam dunk that they'll still have abortion, that's not the case. Because now they don't have a constitutional right to point to. to be argued differently. Now you have to stand with the actual arguments for abortion. That's a very different thing. When it's just a right, it's seen as something that is inalienable. You can't take it away. It has nothing to do with science. It just has to do with your rights, which are God given. That's a fiction. It never was a right. There are natural rights, but abortion is not one of them. Once that framework is taken away, now the politicians, they got to put on their big boy pants, and they have to go to work, and they actually have to now stand in front of courts and judges and prove why abortion is not the killing of a child. With today's modern scientific findings, that's impossible to do. Personally, I suspect, um, even in places where you think that it's going to be, I think that the fight for life there is going to be more animated than ever, and I think that the conservative lifers are going to have um, much more success than they ever believed they could. So to conclude here, I should also say as well, excuse me, one more thing. Um, America is the most influential nation in the world. It's just a fact. There's an expression, America sneezes and Canada catches a cold. No, it's not a joke about viruses. The cultural significance of this cannot be in the same way as exported values through Hollywood. The fact that now in America it is illegal to say that, or the Roe versus Wade has been deemed illegitimate, this will change the culture as well, and it will change anyways how values are exported. It will also change the ideal colonization that happens, because there will be no framework for presidents or whoever in the United States to say we're going to export abortion to other countries, even a right in your own country anymore. There are huge, significant fallouts that will come to this. That will come from this. It is just the beginning. Conclude here. 3 months after Pope Francis consecrates Russia and Ukraine to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, which is on the Annunciation, that coincides exactly with the fact that Our Lady, that was the Annunciation when Christ was incarnate, and then she goes and spends 3 months with Elizabeth. After those 3 months, St. John the Baptist is born. In their meeting between St. John the Baptist and Christ, they're both in utero, and it's the presence of the Sacred Heart being nourished by the blood pumping from the Immaculate Heart that causes the heart of John the Baptist to leap for joy. 3 months later to the day, in line with that biblical narrative, we have the ending of Roe versus Wade, where we have this very rare occasion when the traditional day of John the Baptist and the feast of the Sacred Heart coincide. And there's a meeting between the Sacred Heart and John the Baptist, just like there was in Scripture. 3 months after consecration, which again corresponds to the 3 months Mary spends with Elizabeth. It also has everything to do with Pride Month, because John the Baptist is a defender of marriage, and this month is dedicated to heart. This whole thing is a very big, don't tread on me from heaven. And honestly, no one in their right mind thought this would happen today. And no one thought that Pope Francis would ever do anything seemingly as Catholic as doing a consecration of Russia. I think it's pretty obvious that this is a blessing. I think it's pretty obvious that we can look to this and say, yeah, there's a good chance this is providential, and this has everything to do with this act of faith by the church. A consecration is not a magic formula. Um, it's funny. I've been accused of peddling hope by trying to find ways where the consecration is doing something, as if hope is something you're not supposed to peddle. Apparently, my friends, we're not supposed to peddle hope. Should we also not peddle faith and charity? Because if we're not peddling one of the theological virtues, perhaps we shouldn't peddle the other. We should just peddle despair. That's the question, is it? I am hopeful. What are you if you're not hopeful as a Christian? And if you get to the point where you're so negative that you can't even allow yourself to see something clearly providential, then you're just dominated by negativity. And if that's the case, you can't see reality for what it is. My son's calling after me right now. All right. Wonderful. Well, ladies and gentlemen, praise God. Roe versus Wade is done. Abortion will continue to be defeated. This is the Feast of the Sacred Heart and the traditional day of John the Baptist. I believe Consecration of Russia by Pope Francis is what we have to thank for this. Go to First Saturday this weekend. Go to First Friday today if you can. Pray your rosary every single day, as Taylor Marshall says. If you're not on the team, that's good advice. Check out the links in the description to help out my friend's sister become a nun. She needs it. All right. Good. This has been the Kennedy Report. Until next time, God bless. Oh, gotta get my things here. Sorry, rookie mistake. Here's the real end.